Let him cook.
Definitely we're going to get into music stuff because I'm super interested.
I could talk forever about music, so I
Yeah.
have no problem with that.
Okay, cool. Well, to establish some relevance too, can you
Yeah.
sort of explain like your history in the music industry and
Yeah, I mean, I think when I first started knowing that I wanted to get into music as a career, it was actually in high school when I couldn't find out like what kind of career path I wanted to go down, and it was oddly enough like electronic music that was like, oh, this is music that I actually can like. I can get into the culture, I can get into the community, I can actually care about this music. Like, let's see if like a career in music is worth pursuing, and slowly had to like convince myself over time that it was like worth getting into music as a career. And so when I couldn't find anything that I really wanted to do, like, you know, I didn't want to be like necessarily be a lawyer, even though I did consider law school in college. I didn't want to be like an engineer, even though I did a lot of like, you know, 3D modeling and stuff and early like 3D printing. And I was like, oh, I wonder if, you know, music as a business could be is a path for me. And then once I fell in love with electronic music and specifically started hearing like a lot of dubstep and techno and house music from Chicago, like I was like, oh, this is in seeing Electric Daisy Carnival in Vegas. I mean, you've seen Electric Daisy Carnival.
Never heard of it.
So Insomniac rather, arguably the largest promoter in the world for electronic music, does probably the largest series of music festivals in the world, and their flagship being Electric Daisy Carnival, which literally shuts down Vegas for an entire weekend. And They used to do it. It used to be so big that the city of Vegas made a move to a new speedway, kind of like further outside the city, because it literally shut the whole city down. It's like the Super Bowl of electronic music, right? Up there with like Ultra Miami and Movement in New York, like some of the really big flagship festivals that have been around for a long time. You know, even things like non-EDM focused, like Coachella and other like Bonnaroo. It's up there. I think it might be even bigger than some of those that have been running for 10 years. You know, and I saw a what was like a ticket sales promo ad for Electric Daisy Carnival for 2009, 2010. And I was just getting into like Skrillex and stuff at the time, and they featured a Skrillex track in there, and I was like, oh, Insomniac might become one of the largest music businesses in the world in terms of like live shows, right? And so we started to see electronic music as like a literal market start to explode and become from a small portion of the music industry to being like a really, really, really big part of it. And so it was during like that time between like 2010 and 2012 where a lot of those DJs started to pop up, DJ producers, you know, like really iconic guys. And I was like, okay, let's go ahead and go all into this. I started in college with a small company, you may not know of it, called Live Nation, who is the biggest concert promoter in the world. And I started with an internship with them on their, I want to say it was like a advertising sponsorship side. So like you go into a venue, everything's branded from the napkins to the side of the building. So working on that team, I got to learn a lot about how the music industry operated from a financial perspective and what the limitations of the music industry was at any given time because of the, you know, the financial constraints on the different parts of the music industry, how that affects like an individual artist or someone who actually wants to work as talent in the music industry, because I never really wanted to work as a talent. I wanted to work primarily in live music and live events. And I started off by doing sponsorship marketing, which is like pretty typical where someone might start off, you know, mailroom type stuff. And then working with other actual festival providers. So the first festival that I ever worked for was Lotus World Music Festival, which is operated out of IU, out of Bloomington. 10-year-old, world-renowned world music festival. So it has nothing to do with electronic music. We're talking about like Argentinian polka bands and a Colombian, like a Colombian mariachi band or something. And so I learned a ton about like the different economics behind different styles of music and how a polka band from Argentina, how their finances and their financial situation and the way that they booked shows and went around their careers in music was like vastly worlds apart from like a DJ who travels with a backpack and a thumb drive, you know? And so I got really a lot of exposure to this in college working for Live Nation, a festival. I worked for any venue that would let me in the door. So like some famous ones in Bloomington, like the Bluebird. I did the union board. So the union at any college does a lot of the, student government and like student run event type things. And I was on the music board there, and we were responsible for bringing, like the Little 500 show to fruition, right? So we would do Nicki Minaj and Lil Wayne one year. We did Flosstradamus one year when they were at their peak. I think that was 2016. We did the Flosstradamus because Flume couldn't make it. Those were our top two. If that tells you the dates,
awesome.
the year that was.
Yeah.
Flume and Flosstradamus were at the top of the charts at the time, so that was what we were looking at. And so it was all these like little touches to different parts of. Maybe it was working directly with artists. I worked directly with a management company for about a year and a half, working directly with like day-to-day management and business management with artists. So you name it, I've literally touched a part of that in the music industry. Everywhere from literally going on the road with an artist to do shows on a mini tour to doing 3 shows a weekend with the biggest concert promoter in the world. Or some little backline operation, in an alleyway downtown Indianapolis, right? With some of the smaller promoters that pick up shows that Live Nation doesn't do. So throughout college, I would pick up on these little experiences and found a bunch of little temporary homes in music. Obviously, hitting a peak of my career right before the world's most infamous live event changing. COVID changed everything for the music industry. And so I thankfully got out and started having exposure to other industries like, Tesla, technology, software companies right before COVID hit. And so a lot of my friends that had been like alongside me, like a lot of them did not make it post-COVID. I had a couple friends that did really well. The economics of music during COVID were like a master class in like business administration. Some of the coolest ideas that we ever saw come out of the music industry happened because of COVID.
Such as the digital live sets.
Digital live sets blew up. Everyone loves those because they're deeply personal. It's kind of like a boiler room, right, where everyone's kind of around you, so it's like a little bit more personal. And obviously, the live event part is
one thing that I thought was really cool about that I still appreciate to this day is the fact that you can get a live set with perfect quality audio.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yep. Time coded to the video. So like if you had, like a live studio or like a little setup like you did, you could have, an at-home concert experience that was designed to be transmitted directly through a computer or to a TV screen. And I think that, a lot of artists would have given their arm and their leg to have like a concert movie level recording of their performances for any given show that they do. That'd be huge for an artist, and COVID brought that technology way up to pace with the rest of the industry. The way that they had been making and performing music. The at-home concert experience will, never be the same because of COVID.
Yeah, that's awesome. Can we touch a little bit on the financial aspect? Because one thing that I think is so incredible from my perspective, being naive on the whole industry, I always thought that all these artists that I've loved since high school and whatnot were these multi-millionaire. Because in my head, that's who they are. They're superstars. Mm-hmm. But then you look into it, and these guys aren't making any money.
Yeah.
But like you said, you've got these events that are selling out and destroying Vegas for a week. Mm-hmm. There's got to be a lot of money involved there. Right. Why is it that money doesn't make it back to these artists, or does it only does the money only make it back to specific artists, or what's going on with that whole situation?
We talked at length about the economics of throwing a show because of your interest in like hosting shows. And
can we walk back through that?
Yeah, so I think like the economics of having a show or having a venue are way deeper than people realize. And I used to work for a couple of different promoters that actually owned venues. So Live Nation owns a venue, owns multiple venues or has partnerships with them. MOKB and Do 317, who does a lot of shows in Indianapolis, they own the Hi-Fi and they own this new venue that they're about to open. And so the economics shift depending on your ownership situation. Like if you were to run a promoting company that was like virtually like a ghost kitchen kind of where you would rent everything, that would be a different financial position and would grant you different opportunities than if you had some kind of allegiance or some kind of requirement to a venue to throw X number of shows or to have a certain profit, an operational profit for the year. And so you talk to some of the smaller guys, and the types of margins on shows are really small. It is not a huge money-making operation like you would expect from a large company like Live Nation or like Insomniac that has I don't want to say this wrong, but I'm sure Insomniac has like 20 or 30 different branded festivals. They have an electronic Daisy Carnival in Tokyo and in Shanghai, all over the world, you know, and same thing with like something like Ultra Miami, Ultra Music Group. They have an Ultra in Japan. They have an Ultra in Mexico, EDC in Mexico. So the larger that you go with scale, those larger those margins would get, obviously. But then you have things like insurance, and you have all these types of liabilities, like people getting hurt. And we've had no shortage of like concert tragedy, safety type related events over the last couple of years, which highlights the real cost of owning a venue and doing shows. But yeah, the economics changed drastically when you realize the width, the breadth of the types of artists that are on the road today. And you see a band of like 5 people and how they are literally making less than $0 doing this tour, because they have to, not only do they have to complete the tour with these small 500 to 1,000 cap rooms, they have to make a margin on all of their gear that they've bought. Obviously that's sunk cost, but all the plane tickets for 5 people, all the food and hotel rooms and toilets for 5 people. So a band of 5 people has a much different economic prospect of going on tour than a DJ who's one guy with one backpack, one luggage, a pair of headphones, and a USB stick, right? And so the prospects of hiring a DJ became very attractive for a small period of time, where the value proposition for a venue and for the artist, the DJ, the margin was a lot higher, because they're stuff that you could rent. You could rent Pioneer Nexus 2000s, rent a good Nexus 2000 mixer. You have a built-in, you know, good line array at your venue. That's a really easy show to do. You know, you have one person on AV for the most part. You have visuals brought in by the DJ that are in a standard time code that you can run through your system. You know, that's a very, very attractive business model to have. So DJs really took off because they're low overhead and high margin. But then DJs figured out that they were also superstars. Yeah. and then the economics change again. And so it really is just about understanding each artist's unique aspect of their business, how much they can really draw in any given market, because this will change even with the market that they're in too. Like if you do really well in Europe versus well in the US, it's different. So every artist out there is in their own unique financial scenario, just like every small business is. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand, is that their favorite artist, very, very realistically, is like a small business, you know, grossing maybe a couple $1 million a year, which sounds like a lot. But when you think about not only the talent, the management, the agent, the tour manager, the merch, if you have a merch person, you know, if you don't do that yourself, if you do lights and sound and you have a photographer and a videographer, like, you're rolling with a crew, man.
Yeah,
and that,
$2 million doesn't go very far in a year.
Yeah, and so when you look at, you know, famous examples of, oh, this artist got screwed by this big contract, well, realistically, they wouldn't have been able to make a career for themselves if they hadn't have gone with a contract like that, because they wouldn't have been able to do the out-of-pocket expenses. They wouldn't have been able to front themselves the money, or find an entity to front themselves the money. Like, who's going to put up a $20 million bill for a World Coliseum tour? Only the people who know and understand that industry, like Live Nation, would be able to finance and operate a tour of that scale. You know, there's other companies out there, but so it's this huge dynamic range of artists and their situations, and how that plays into the way that you consume their media, and the way that, hey, maybe they don't show up to your city. It's not because they don't want to be there. It's because the financials behind it won't let them. You know, there's not a venue with the right size that can sell the right ticket at the right time to the right amount of people to make it financially reasonable for that artist to come to Indianapolis, let's say. So we miss out. Indianapolis specifically misses out on a tier of artists that's a little bit bigger than our medium-sized venues, but not too big, like something like Taylor Swift that can, you know, sell out the Gainesfield for 2 nights in a row.
Yeah.
You know.
Talk to me again about the marketplace of artists from the perspective of the venues. Yeah. You were telling me there's sort of like a stock market equivalent, where all this stuff's quantified to make a decision on who to bring and when. Yep.
Yeah. So if you think of a stock like just like a financial vehicle, think of all the pressures that are on that financial vehicle, right? You have the ability, the number of people who are willing to buy it. You have the price that they're willing to pay for it, and you have the total number of people in a market that could buy that product, right? And so just like any typical market forces, you have that on an artist and their ability to sell a ticket, right? So similarly to what you said, like in Polestar, for instance, Polestar being like, I want to call it like the Bloomberg of the music industry, where they have data on average ticket price per geography, right? So across the country, let's take Chapel Roan, for instance. What can Chapel Roan sell a ticket for in California, Nevada, Indiana, Ohio, right? Well, she's like famously like this Midwest artist, right? So it would be fairly reasonable to assume that like she would do really well in the Midwest, and her ticket prices would actually hold up in areas like the Midwest where things are, the artificial suppression of the cost of living is just because there's a lot less out here, a lot more people with less money to spend on stuff like entertainment. But her ticket prices actually hold well in the Midwest market, whereas like a West Coast act would not be able to sell as many tickets in the Midwest. So you would look at their kind of matrix and you would say, oh, this artist should primarily tour in these states based on streaming data, based on market pricing for their tickets. Like you said, the marketplace of artists. And there's companies out there like Polestar that keep tabs on these things. So for talent buyers, the people who is literally their job to say which artists are on your summer concert series this year, there's a guy or gal behind that is a buyer, right? And just like any asset buyer, they need to make a return on their investment, and that needs to be calculated very, very specifically. And so a buyer will say, can we afford to get Chapel Roan in here? Because some artists are so hot that you can't afford to bring them on at any price. They're just like Taylor Swift, for instance. She calls the shots. She has the hottest ticket in the world. There's no company in the world that could compete with her. So she gets to call the shots. But for many artists, their tour schedule is very much influenced by these buyers and whether or not they can justify or show with data a return on investment for that ticket. Because if they're wrong more often than they're not, that venue is going to suffer. People won't show up for that concert series. What happens when you have costs that are squeezed on these venues like that? They'll start charging more for parking. They'll start charging, instead of $20 a beer, they'll charge $30 a beer. And then people's consumption of music also has a focus on this. Like, how many records did you buy this year?
0.
That's why your ticket prices are so high.
Yeah.
And the beer cost for and so going into my venue experience, how do you offset the cost of the tickets? More expensive beer, more expensive ticket tiers, charging for parking, tiering experiences, right? So VIP, ultra VIP, diamond backstage VIP green room, right? So like the tiered experiences, how the invention of those type of things lead from the economics of people buying less music and buying more experienced music through concert tickets. And so that all plays into account when a buyer goes to decide what the concert lineup's going to look like this summer, and an artist goes to like their agent and says, hey, like, how's the tour looking? How's that tour you're putting together? Always influenced by regional geographic influences on whether or not it makes sense for this particular venue in a cornfield in Indiana to bring an act. Sometimes dozens of semi trucks and tour buses and hundreds of people to operate this. Can we make a return on investment? And if that is, it's just like investment banking. If we cannot justify a return on investment, we might not be able to bring that artist.
Are you pretty versed on the technology that it takes to run a live show?
Not so much. Like, I have a general understanding of.
Would you understand like the people that are required to make certain technology work? So
100%.
my question would be like, the DJ with the thumb drive.
Yeah.
He's got to have some sort of a team too, right? Yeah. Somebody has to run the lights and that's another series of questions that I have. It's like, when I watch Virtual Riot play, he's always got a sophisticated light show and this and that.
Yeah.
How do you transfer venue to venue and keep the experience the same across it? Because you don't have the same lighting set up in each venue.
Right.
But it seems to still be coordinated with the show.
Yeah.
So how does all that work?
So there's I'm not sure what the format, if there is a format, but there's what's called like a time code, and CDJs specifically have this functionality. So if this ever gets onto the internet in a big way, like I'd be flamed for saying that Pioneer Nexus lineup would be like the de facto industry standard for DJs. I would argue that it pretty much is and has for the last 10 years. Before their Alpha Theta buyout, they've been the de facto go-to, with maybe some exceptions for some DJs that like more turntablism, scratching, sample-based approaches, and then like for live artists like Porter Robinson or someone who incorporates a lot of like live elements, they might be different. But for the de facto standard industry DJ out there, I would think that Pioneer would be a safe answer for what is the standard house equipment look like? What does the de facto standard for DJs look like? It's Pioneer, typically. They have a function within the Pioneers called time coding, where you can essentially send a clock from the actual function of the turntable playing music. You can send a time code out to the back of the house, which is the guys at the back with the big mixing desks. And they will sync that time code of the music playing every second to a visual aid. And that visual aid is running on a separate computer that's in the back of the house. And so you typically, in the most simplified version of this, you'd have a sound guy and a light and what they call a VDJ or a video DJ. And a video DJ, very similarly to an actual DJ, has kind of like a controller setup. They don't have turntables, but they do have like what would be like sample pads, kind of like on your road here, they have the different hit pads. Well, all of those hit pads and sliders are assigned to lighting functions. So some of what you're asking is actually done live.
Really?
So not
there's
only do
an
they have
unsung
the visual,
hero in the background that like making the whole visual thing work.
100%.
So there's another show happening.
There's a whole separate show happening both
That's
behind
crazy.
the stage.
I had no idea.
Yeah, so with the actual sound behind the stage, there's a whole separate performance going on with bands. They have their guitar techs and their bass techs and drum techs that run the live sound coming off the stage to the back of house. But for a video, let's talk like a regular standard DJ that would come with a syncopated lighting and video background, or let's say like a capture wall or motion capture or video wall. There's a whole separate show going on right at the back of the venue, where there's both a syncopated light and video, and then there's a live element of a dude literally hitting these sample pads that move the lights in a specific sequence for specific songs. Like some songs have a colored theme. Boom, he's hitting the pad that hits the strobes at the big part of the song. So there's literally a dude in the background. Everyone's facing towards the stage. There's a guy behind him jamming along with the DJ, hitting his light sequences and his video sequences.
That is so
along
cool.
with the with the music.
Crazy. Mm-hmm. So there has to be some great synergy between the artist and the guy running the light show, right?
Correct.
So I'm guessing that the light show, the VDJ, is coming with the artist, not the venue.
Yes, and that's, I would say that for the majority of the shows that can allow that, because some venues don't have that ability, so they'll have like some level of pre-recorded motion, or if like the venue for whatever reason, like this is a touring manager and an agent's job to determine what dates on a calendar have what capabilities. So if you were to look at like Excision, for instance, when he was touring, on some of his older touring calendars, you would see asterisks, and those asterisks at the bottom would indicate this support is going to be there, or that artist isn't going to be there, whatever the openers. But it would also sometimes indicate whether or not that they would have the full show, or maybe a tuned down version of the show, because the literal size of the stage, like the projection wall that they had to be like squeezed down. This was famous in Dylan Francis's and Zed's performance back in 2017. They had the world's largest LED wall at the time, and they had to shrink down the sides of it to fit in downtown Indianapolis at the Pepsi Coliseum, because they couldn't fit the whole thing. So in that case, like, yes, but asterisk, you know? So sometimes they could roll with the full sound system, sometimes asterisks. So some dates you'd have the full VDJ in production, like on the big flagship dates, your New York's, Chicago's, LA's. And on other dates, you'd have like a pared down version of the show, smaller stage setup, more limited lighting setup. You'd still get a version of the show for the most part. To the person who's following the show date from date, like a Deadhead, you would see the differences for sure. Okay,
so if we bring this all back into Indiana, what sort of capabilities? I'm sure we have a full range of different types of venues, right? From these small dialed down ones. Do we have capability to do flagship shows in Indiana anywhere?
Not really. They're limited. So like if you were to think
we don't have a market for it.
There's a lot of variables that go into this, but there is an underserved part of Indie's music scene where essentially there's a caliber of artists that we might never be able to see, partly because the economics don't make a lot of sense. Indianapolis specifically is not like known as a music mecca, which I think is like criminally underrated. Indianapolis has been slept on for our music scene for a long time, and I don't think there's a lot of people that really appreciate how many people have come out of the Indiana and Indianapolis music scene. And I'd be tough to name a couple, but I'm part of the problem here. But yeah, I consider myself lucky whenever I see an artist that is like fairly like not super well known be able to come to Indianapolis, because it's like, oh, that way I know that they're a really good artist, because the economics would turn out in their favor. Like, 10,000 people would turn out to see Porter Robinson downtown Indianapolis. And I feel so grateful that, Porter was able to keep that show on the schedule, that artists like him are able to come to Indy, because it doesn't seem to be super profitable for that cusping artist that's right between like killer act and superstar. We don't get a ton of those, like the superstar DJs that we love. Don't really make a lot of stops here, because we've never had like a very stable mid-cap venue. We have some pretty large extremes. We've got Ruoff up north in Noblesville, which is a 25,000 cap. And then down here in Indianapolis, we've got a couple. We've got the White River, which is a 15,000 cap, which is somewhere right in that sweet spot, which is why I love that venue. Then we have right below that, the old National Center, which would have the Egyptian Room at 5,000 people. Below that, the Deluxe at the basement, which is I think a 500 cap venue, maybe closer to 1,200 now that I think about it. And then they have the Marat, which is the seated theater, which I think is 2,500, but it's seated. So it's like acts at that level would have really kind of a tough time. Mostly dad rock, coming through to a seated venue. Then you have some of the independent guys like the Hi-Fi, which I'm not entirely sure on its capacity, but I think is close to like 700 or 800. So it's pretty small. They're just opening the new one, which is the Hi-Fi Annex, which used to be out back. It used to be like an outdoor type of another COVID innovation. Them being able to throw shows throughout COVID, because they're like, you know what, fuck it, we're going to use the parking lot out back. We're going to open an outdoor venue, because we have historically an indoor venue. We can't do a COVID show. Hell yeah, we're moving outdoors. Now we're going to move it back indoors and make it a legit venue. Like COVID may have like helped assist and facilitate that in a way that, they might not, I'm sure they realize, but a lot of people don't realize that, COVID really pushed people to make some really cool innovations in live music. And this would be one of them. We are now getting a new independently owned 1,200 cap venue in Indianapolis that's going to be picking up on some of the shows that we've been missing out on. But still, the Egyptian Room seems to be the only mid-cap venue that we have that would be able to afford the types of shows that we would want, which are like those mid to upper tier DJs at the top of their game, like your Virtual Riots and your Trivectas. So it'd be tougher for them to come out versus someone who's like a DJ at like the top of their game also might not be able to come, because Indianapolis is going to price them out. They need to hit a certain threshold. And like, what kind of DJ that we know is going to be able to compete with like a Taylor Swift and sell out Gainesfield? No way.
If we could somehow get the market from Indianapolis to get one of these people into Ruoff, is that a flagship show there?
Yeah, that would be like a flagship show. That would be the equivalent of I would consider like an arena, like an outdoor amphitheater tour to be right below an arena tour, which would be right below like a Coliseum.
Now,
tour.
Who's doing arena tours in the EDM world right now?
Arena tours in the EDM world right now. Is that like
Skrillex, Excision?
Oh, I don't even think Skrillex is like really. He's not really touring like that as much as he used to be.
That blows my mind.
That's a whole separate thing with him and Atlantic. That's just now coming to light, because he just announced his last album being released will be his last one with Atlantic Records. And we can talk all day about record labels, predatory relationship with artists, and how late stage in an artist's career, the label becomes more of a hamper on them because like Skrillex signing with Atlantic would have been huge 10 years ago, but now it's like they're probably hampering him, from being able to do what he wants, which is bring
Is contracts expiring? So it's
many labels
has a sunset built into it.
Many labels will do a sunset, which is like we'll own 15% in perpetuity forever of maybe like a master's. But many will have a album length specific contract. So they'll say, Skrillex, we're going to sign you to Atlantic Records. We need you to put out 4 albums. And so however long that takes is probably negotiable, but that would be the way that you would do that. And now Skrillex famously had that Owsla, which was that record label Owsla that was his. And it was famously pressured under. I'm not entirely sure about the dynamics of it. I had a friend that worked there And in about 2019, the label kind of dispersed, and most of the people who were known to be affiliated with that project went on to other things. So I would think that once this record deal with Atlantic is up, you would see a revival of Skrillex's homegrown label, so he can own more of Skrillex than he does currently. You saw that with Taylor Swift, with her Scooter Braun famously buying the masters to a bunch of Taylor Swift's music. So she was underneath that for a while. She owned the sync rights and the songwriter rights, so she could re-record those and make new masters. But yeah, just an example of like how in late stage in an artist's career and a label can have an adverse effect on how they release music. Yeah.
Right. So that's another thing that I am so wrong about after talking to you is my sense of scale of each of these artists. So in my world before talking to you, Skrillex was God tier level.
I would
right?
agree.
He was the biggest.
Everyone loves Skrillex.
But in terms of size, I thought he was the biggest guy. And I put like Excision sort of with Trivecta and Virtual Riot, but I realized that's completely wrong after talking to you.
Yeah, sometimes some artists will surprise you, like the business they've been doing in the background. The way that they've been able to really intelligently own their own business, retain ownership, and then use that equity in stuff that they have ownership over.
So what did Excision do differently than everybody else that put him so far ahead?
So Excision, I believe, was the driving force behind Lost Lands. So Lost Lands in Ohio being one of the premier dubstep and bass music events out there. He, I believe, and I don't know the specifics behind it, but I believe he's the executive owner and producer of Lost Lands, right? And so I think that some artists, they get chewed up by the machine and they get too caught up with like doing shows and being big, and then other artists are in the background like, how can I create my own record label, right? My own distribution, my own production company, throw my own shows, don't have to rely on Live Nation or renting out facilities for one-off shows if I wanted to do that. And so a lot of those artists are probably looking at that, especially nowadays when the meta of working in the music industry is so well known, like the predatory practices of like 360 contracts and just the general predatory practices of record labels is like well known, studied in schools almost. I studied musical contracts in school, and like why artists, the shady record label executive behind the bar be like, oh gee, I'd love to give you 10% of my masters for $10,000, and the guy's like, rubbing his hands because he knows these are going to be hits and he's going to own 10% forever. So those things are like well known, and so there's artists out there that make a dedicated effort to build their own businesses, their own versions of these things, so they can retain ownership and be more profitable making music. So because they don't have to give it all away. That's the problem with making music, is that all of these industries that facilitate your music career are so entrenched and they cost a lot of money to utilize, right? And famously, there are Coliseum tours out there, famous touring artists that make a whopping $0 on their tour, sold out 22 Coliseums across the world, didn't make a single dollar because they owed it all back to the label or whatever, or the economics weren't done right. The buyers weren't aligned. The agent didn't do his job right. You name it. There's 1,000 ways that an artist can get screwed by a tour, the less and less pieces that they own. And so you look at some artists that are doing better than others and you say, okay, what parts of their business did they own versus what parts did they have to utilize through the label or their management, because those entities are trying to take a larger and larger portion of your business. However, they do provide opportunities. And, if your management brings you a record deal worth $1 million, that's a huge advantage for you as an artist. And to pay 10%, 15% on that doesn't seem like a lot in the moment. But many artists are
could be your entire profit margin. Yeah.
That's what they don't tell you. They don't tell you what the prospects of you return on investment. They want your return. Right? They want you to pay them back, because that's how most of those contracts work, is that the label will give you $250,000 up front and you have to produce 3 albums with that over the next 3 years. And if you don't get that return of $250,000, you owe the record label money. Now, this is a little bit of an older people, like I said, artists are more privy to this than they used to be. It still doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And there's plenty of artists. Like one article that I read a long time ago that really sticks out to me was an artist that I particularly liked that was signed on to Skrillex's record label, Owsla. And this reporter sat down, it's like a Rolling Stones producer, sat down with him and was like, "You're an up-and-coming superstar DJ that just got signed to Skrillex's record label. Like, how do you feel?" And the guy goes, "I make less money than I did working at the hardware store. I make like $36,000 a year." Now, this was 2010, 11, or 12. So like still a fairly nominal amount of money to be making. But you would think as like this up-and-coming superstar producer DJ, you're probably getting paid more than netting 30 to 40 grand a year. But that's not the case. A lot of these, mid-sized artists, perfectly great artists, are more like a small business than they are like this superstar celebrity operation. Like they employ maybe 10 to 30 people. They gross, maybe $1 million, $2 million a year, which for a small business is like not a ton of money, because you're netting a lot less than that. So, and a lot of people don't realize like how much closer to a small business their favorite artist is than, a celebrity, impenetrable celebrity superstar, multimillionaire.
How could an individual like you or I influence the market in Indiana to bring in more people? Or is that even a possibility? Because at the end of the day, it's the consumer that you'd have to influence, and we can't just make everybody like the music that we like, right?
Of course not. Yeah, no. I would love it if Indianapolis like got into a dubstep phase. That'd be sick.
I just need Virtual Riot to come here, dude.
We can beg and plead. We can hit Virtual Riot up on X all day, and I'm sure that we could get something going. Like I'm sure if you or I are thinking,
we'd have to take a financial loss personally, but we can make it happen.
You'd be surprised how many times I approached a buyer and said, "Hey, I think this artist would do really well," and they go, "Who?" And I'm like, "Hey, you have a whole untapped market for electronic music here, or rap artists specifically. Like in Indiana, we don't book a lot of big rappers, even though we would have them. We definitely have the market for it. And so I brought on. Are you familiar with Black Tiger Sex Machine?
Yeah.
So I actually convinced the owner of the Bluebird in my senior year as part of a project, as part of my music industry career or schooling. I was to be involved in the production of a show, and I was going to figure this out on my own. So I went to the owner of the Bluebird and I said, "Here's 10 artists that I think would sell out the Bluebird that I would love to see personally." I didn't even tell the dude I wasn't 21, so I couldn't even enter the venue during operation hours. And I'm giving him advice about who would show up. So I gave him a list of artists, and he goes, "Oh, I'll look it over." And he hits me back up. He texts me and he goes, "What is Black Tiger Sex Machine? Is this even a band? Like, what kind of weird shit is this?" And I was like, "Dude, they're probably one of the coolest live electronic shows that I've ever seen. And if you've ever seen Black Tiger Sex Machine, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Very crazy production. You talk about a video synced to some music. 3 fully built, 3D printed, custom Panther helmets with lights and eyes and laser beams, and 3 dudes across three production setups, live electronic drums sampled, I'm sure, along with probably some live mixing on CDJs. Very complicated, high-tech production. Even they were within budget for the Bluebird. Wow. And they bought I think it was that next fall season, that next student return season, they had Black Tiger Sex Machine, and it sold out the Bluebird that year.
You pulled it off.
I didn't even get to go because I wasn't 21.
That's crazy.
I was there. I wasn't wandering around or anything, but yeah, it was a very cool show. Big Wild also was, I was not influenced. I did not influence that. He came with Odessa that year. But Odessa, another one of those artists that fall into that live electronic category that is, just absolutely incredible. Starting super small at some shitty dive bar, the dive bar tour, right? And then they end up with a big stadium tour before they retired, I think, which was this last year, unofficially retired, I think. But
nuts. Well, okay, we're gonna get Virtual Riot in Indy somehow.
So you could go to a buyer. You could go to Josh Brown, owner of MOKB and Do 317 here in Indianapolis, and you could say, "Hey, JB, I think Virtual Riot might sell at least 1,200 tickets, but Virtual Riot, I'm sure, dude, his production, he's got to cost close to 100 grand."
Seriously.
To book him. I'll give you an example. So Flume, was on when 2016, Flume had just released a really banger album in between when we started talking to his agent and when we were going to book him for this show. And I remember our budget was about $100,000 for the whole thing. And Flostradamus came in and was like at number 2. And between the time we reached out to all these different agents about booking a show, we reached out to like Flume, and Flume I think was like 90 to 100K for his cost to do the show. And in between like the 3 months, he had this huge album come out. I think it was Grammy nominated, and it jumped to $250,000 in 3 months. So you want to talk about the marketplace of an artist? It can change just like an asset, like a stock, right? You put out a Grammy-winning album, and your line goes up. The cost of your show just doubled, you know. And so sometimes like that, you'd have to default back to another artist that, you know, is willing to pick up that show at that price.
Do you think somebody like the guy you're talking about that owns the venue would be open to a proposition where I say, hey, it's my 27th birthday in January. I want to bring Virtual Ride in. I will front the $100,000, but I want to make my money back first.
No.
Okay.
That's the first part. I think you're coming in you had me in the first half, not gonna lie, but the second half, I don't think that they would allow you to take part in any of the profit sharing.
Even if I fronted the cost?
That'd be a tough proposition.
Damn.
But I would imagine like the guy that I talked to, he probably wouldn't be like the buyer. He'd probably have some say in it maybe. I don't know what his exposure is these days, but whoever their buyer is right now, you could reach out to them via email and say, hey, I have this idea, you know, because it's really just like an idea. It's like a trade. Like, hey, I think that you guys could sell however, with the new venue, let's just take their new venue, for example, 1,200 tickets. I think you could sell 1,200 tickets at, you know, $60 a piece. And would that, you know, I don't have my calculator handy, would that cover the cost of bringing on someone like Virtual Riot? And they would be able to go to whatever their technology is that they're using to make
their
informed
Virtual
purchase.
Riot, their Virtual Riot stock market.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They would go and they do some research, right? They do like their good old fashioned, you know, research, and they'd say, okay, what other markets has Virtual Riot played a show in recently? Are any of them comparable to indie? What were the ticket prices? What was the average cost? Their buyer would reach out to Virtual Riot's agent and say, what show openings do you have during what periods of time and what exclusion zones? Because if he's playing another show, he might have an exclusion zone saying he can't play another show in this geography during that period of time, as to not take away from the ticket sales of the larger, more important, already established event, which is fairly typical for festivals, which is why you don't see a bunch of artists playing like pop-up shows around a festival, because they're excluded from doing so, because they know that they could capitalize on the already existing market there. So you'd have to take that in a vacuum and say, can Virtual Riot sell enough tickets at a certain price that would make it profitable for us to run this show? And that would be the unfortunate reality of your question, is that we don't know. And as much love as we have in our heart for some of these artists, like sometimes the numbers just don't crunch. You know, and it sucks, especially in a market like indie, which is so underserved. You would think that it would be a little bit easier maybe, but it's actually way harder.
Are you friends still with some of the people at these venues that make these decisions?
Not as much these days. I've been out of the industry for so long that, I mean, I have a lot of love for it. And obviously like I keep up with a lot of like influencers in the music business area. And, you know, I still have I have a lot of friends that still work for agencies or venues, or I have friends that still do production for shows, or are managers, or are still on their dream of, you know, making music professionally. So, because I mean, I haven't lost it either. It's still fun to participate when you can. But no, I don't think I have any connections that would grant me any valuable experiences. You know, I'm buying tickets these days just like everybody else.
Yeah.
However, once you have Live Nation or a venue on your resume, every year, every summer, without fail, somebody hits me up on LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever it is and said, "Hey man, can you get me some tickets to this show?" I was like, "Yeah, man, send me the exact the exact amount of money that you need to buy the tickets, because I'm right there buying tickets right with you." So no, I'm not privy to the backstage experiences anymore. Although I did have a lot of fun. Working on those shows. It's a grueling job. Very, very tough to work, because you're first in, last out at a concert. So you show up at noon.
Takes all the fun out of it.
You show up at noon and you take off at 3 in the morning.
Yeah,
and that's your entire weekend forever, for the rest of your life. Your weekend is, they call it the industry weekend, which is why you see all the bartenders and the people who run the venues, they go out on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays because their work day is Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's a cultural thing. All the industry folks, they go out on the Monday because that's their weekend.
Okay, I got another question here. What value would I need to provide to an artist to get them on this podcast? What are they looking for? I mean, exposure obviously is not here yet because I don't have a lot of viewership, but maybe someday. But
it's
what
a good
else?
buddy. You know, you gotta be a good buddy, and you have to have some kind of, you know, there's not a lot of like really prominent touring artists that live in Indiana. I would think that the first thing that you would want to do is provide them a platform to speak about something that's like outside their music career, which could be something that they like personally, or, you know, talk about, you know, the business side of music, which is not something that a lot of people really like to talk about. I would think that a lot of what I'm doing right now is showing how the sausage is made. And I don't think a lot of artists particularly like to get into that. You know, I think they really appreciate.
You think that was the mistake I made in that DM?
I don't think so. No, I think that any artist loves the fact that they have people who are willing to like have them on a show, but like you have to think about what kind of instance it would have to be to have someone come to Indianapolis. Like I think you could 100% take up, you know, message every artist that comes to Indy that has a tour date in Indiana for the next 12 months and just say, hey, would you be willing to come on this podcast and talk about, you know, literally anything but music? And I'm sure that they'd probably want to.
Really?
Oh, I can imagine. I mean, I would think that an artist, just like anyone else, you know, is always looking for something fun to do, you know, and obviously like nobody wants to live in a hotel room. Like touring is famously grueling. It sucks. You live in a bus or in a hotel room for 6 to 12 months of your life, unless you're Taylor Swift and you have planes and shit. Like this is a tough job. Not a lot of people. You are sweating.
Isn't that funny compared to like the stereotype that everybody has in their head about what touring is like?
That it's glamorous. That,
yeah,
dude. People haven't. No, dude. People haven't been living rock star lifestyles for years. Like you look back. Like that is what has happened in the past with like rock star lifestyle will never happen again. You need to be workable in the music industry, and if you're out there trashing hotel rooms and throwing TVs out windows and you know being hard to work with, especially with venues, they don't care. They got a never-ending line of people who are also working on their dream that they can book on that next tour. Like the industry has no problem dropping you if you suck. It has no problem doing that, especially these days. It used to not be the case. You know, you were the man. You know. You're Ozzy Osbourne. You're name any big touring actor.
Eagles, yeah.
Any rock star level, you know, Motley Crue, famously Motley Crue. Even those guys still toured. And I was at a Motley Crue show when I worked for Live Nation. They are not rock stars anymore. They are old dudes. That attitude does not get you far anymore. They were actually like better friends with some of the old heads than they were like this, you know, problematic rock star. They were old heads right along with them. They had been to that venue 20 times since the 80s, you know, whatever it is. So I think a lot of that mentality is like way gone. You got to be easy to work with. You got to be flexible. You have to be right price, right time. You know, it's
So the life of touring sucks, and it's not that far-fetched that I could get somebody on this podcast.
Yeah, if someone's coming to Indianapolis, like, first of all, being in Indianapolis sucks. Because, like, if you are stopping in Indianapolis on a tour, it's because you are in between two much better shows, somewhere between Nashville and Chicago. You probably played a banger in Nashville, and you're on your way to play a banger in Chicago, and you have to stop in Indianapolis.
Okay, gotcha.
So I would think that any artist that's coming through that's not super excited to be in Indianapolis would love to come hang out in your office and get a nice view and hang out and talk about like their interests outside of music. Partly because, I mean, you see interviews these days, like it's almost cliche in interviews to talk about, oh, what made you get into music? They're like, oh my God, kill me.
Yeah.
You know, so they could literally talk about literally anything else. And I'm sure you could get a non-zero amount of artists that come through Indianapolis to come hang out for
Would you come hang out with us if I can get somebody?
Yeah. No, I'd have 1,000. I mean, you know, even though I don't have all the answers, but I have 1,000 questions that I would ask a modern touring artist. I'm a huge gearhead, so I'd want to know like what rigs are they running on their guitars and their microphones, and like what does their front of house, back of house look like? How many people are on their tour? Yeah, I'd have 1,000 questions.
Cool, man.
Stuff
We're
that
gonna
I
make
don't
that
even
happen.
exposure.
That's a goal.
Oh yeah, I mean, Trifecta, come on to this podcast. We want to come. We want to go see your show. We want to have you on the podcast.
Yeah,
before
Trifecta.
or
We can talk
after.
about literally anything. I did mention the music thing, but if you don't want to talk about
Literally
music, I know that's your job and you're working.
No,
we can
no,
talk about anything else.
He's on the clock. I'm sure there's 1,000. That's the thing. I think, and a lot of times people, of course, that's what like the fans want to see is their favorite artist talking about their art. But I'm pretty sure that gets old as that gets really old really fast for people who.
We can talk about seasoning steaks. I know he's big into steaks.
Yeah, let's
and
talk
also
about like grilling.
actually, I do want to know one thing music wise about him. The guitar thing, dude. He's so incredible on the guitar.
Oh,
I love how he still incorporates that into his live music.
Underrepresented in modern music is the guitar. I think the DJ who plays the guitar is like such an underrepresented silhouette in live electronic music right now. Like it'd be so easy to have a great guitar player get up there and mix and play the guitar and improvise along with his tracks. Because first of all, DJs play all in D anyway. It's all in the same key for an hour and a half anyway. You could just noodle on a guitar in D for an hour and a half. I'm sure you could.
That's so good, dude. And he is incredible on the guitar. Have you ever seen him in live?
I've seen videos of him. Yeah, like any type of live electronic setup just tickles me. I always think of people like Porter Robinson, who has like a next level integrated live and electronic setup. Black Tiger Sex Machine, Flume famously had one. Anyone that can play the guitar along with their set, dude, sign me up, front row. The Glass Animals for a while had like some electronic elements, and they were more of like an indie rock, but just some really incredible fusion of live and electronic. That's like where I think that's like my favorite type of music at the moment.
Cool. What's your next steps in music career?
I'm out of the music industry, but 100%. If I were to ever get back in, promote. It's funny that you had hit me up about doing music promotion, is because that's like the one logical place where everyone's mind goes. They're like, I want to get in the music industry. They don't think of being an agent or a touring manager, and like obviously some of those jobs are like entrenched, but like being a promoter always seems like a really easy thing to do in theory. If I could just get Trifecta to show up and we can find a venue to rent out and we could sell some tickets, we could make some money. And that is like a classic idea in music. And as much as it is difficult, I mean, there are people who probably start production companies every year, that put on a couple shows, keep it small, keep it local, really cater to a local audience that the big guys like Live Nation just are numb to, and that's why we do see like independent production companies like Indie Mojo is one that I forgot to shout out. Indie Mojo is another independent promotion company that's been operating out of Indianapolis and out of the Mousetrap for, oh man.
Indie Mojo seems so much
years.
bigger than they are. Because I've seen Indie Mojo all over everything. I knew who that was.
They're a big partner.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah. It's crazy.
Well, the guy who runs that, I'm so sorry, forgive me for forgetting your name. The guy who runs that, awesome dude. I've worked with him in the past. He was always the partner. He was the guy like you that knew the artists that could really do well in Indiana, that Live Nation just didn't tap into. They don't care about electronic music so much so. They do now, but they are the traditional bands and traditional touring acts that would come through like Live Nation. And so they were looking at people like Indie Mojo, and I could probably pull up a couple examples of shows, co-pros, they call them co-productions, where they would co-pro on a electronic show. Live Nation's like, who the fuck is Black Tiger Sex Machine? What the hell? Can we even show that to an all ages audience? and Indie Mojo would be the guy that'd be like, no, I know the market. Cause like I said, the marketplace of artists isn't like super comprehensive. There's plenty of artists out there that do not have regular floating around data of like how well they do in any market. So sometimes it's people's instinct. Like the guy who runs Indie Mojo would know. Kai Wachi, for instance, was coming up quite well, and he did really well at the Mousetrap, and super great dude. Got to talk to him a little bit before the show. Guys like him, we would never see in Indiana if it wasn't for, I believe his name is Matt, now that it's coming to me, Indie Mojo's Matt. If it wasn't for people like Matt who would identify acts like that and reach out to Live Nation and say, hey, do you want to go halvesies on this? We would never get those kind of artists.
It's incredible.
So you could come up with a co-pro that would do really well.
This Matt guy with Indie Mojo owns
Indie Mojo.
But he owns the Mousetrap?
No, I don't think so. I think it's more of a production partnership. Yeah,
Gotcha.
I think the ownership of the Mousetrap might be entirely
So what does he do?
separate.
He's like freelancing. He's
He's an independent promoter. Yeah, I think it's him and his wife actually. I think they're like a 2-man shop. I think that they like.
So they're just connecting venue to artist.
Yeah, I think that they have a really good relationship with the owner of the Mousetrap, so that because like that's where they. I wouldn't say exclusively do shows because they've had co-pros with Old National Center where they had like the Egyptian Room. I think every time Excision came through Indianapolis, I think it was a co-pro with Indie Mojo. So a lot of the bigger artists, the bigger DJs that we like are usually co-pros with other smaller production companies that can identify the market better than Live Nation can.
I'm sorry to go backwards, but curiosity is killing me here. So how is it that some of these artists can be playing at Lost Lands in these big venues, but then they can only sell a 500 cap everywhere else? Like, how does that all work? Are the venue people just trying to fill slots, or?
So some artists know their place, and I don't say this like in a demeaning way, like know your place, but they know where they do really well. And so like have you ever heard of someone say, "Oh, they're a Vegas act"?
Yeah.
They do well in Vegas, right? So some artists, they can't pull an audience on their own, right? I wouldn't call Virtual Riot one of these artists, but I would think that he would do better on a festival stage. Like more people would have more access to his music on a festival stage than if he were to do a single tour by himself. I feel like he would actually.
Is that just because of brand recognition right now? Or
it could be a mix of both. Like, you have to think about value for product. And this is so awful that I'm thinking about this in the way that I am with my love of music. And it's like, this is, people, if anyone ever comments on this, be like, this guy doesn't belong in the music industry. It's all about money for him. But like, it's the unfortunate reality that it's probably not as, it's probably not as realistic for Virtual Riot to say, I'm going to headline my own tour and go around the country and rent out all my venues and do that, as opposed to being on the festival circuit, right? If you get picked up on the festival circuit, could be fairly lucrative because festivals have more money because they have larger crowds and lower expenditures than a venue does. Because I don't know if you've ever been to a festival, pretty bare bones. We're talking porta potties, dirt fields, lower margins or larger margins. And so on a festival circuit, you would probably get paid, depending on your exposure, you'd probably get paid a little bit easier than if you were to have to own your own tour, and then you'd have to do all the calculations at the very end of the tour and see what you made versus what you lost. Whereas with festival shows, it's like play the show, they send the check. So for a DJ, particularly doing the festival scene, could be a lot more lucrative than doing their own tour. And I think that's a natural progression. When you see an artist and they are getting to the point where they can do their own shit, that's how you know that they've finally made it. They're not just grinding out the festivals. They're not just hitting all the clubs. They're like, hey guys, super excited to announce that I'm going on tour. I'm headlining my own tour. Like that's the next echelon, right, for an artist. So you look at someone like a Billie Eilish, who's been very highly documented throughout her career, and her career skyrocketed super fast. So you get this really unique experience of watching an artist grow from like this person who is basically on SoundCloud to someone who is literally at the top of the game, selling out stadiums across the world. And you can see the perfect step ladder progression from one level to the next. Plenty of artists follow that, but it's really cool to see with her because she's done it so fast, and she's also really young. So you get to see like what it really looks like, especially at that young age, to hit that next echelon in your career and to be able to own more and more of your business and to be able to profit more and more because of the hard work that you put in realistically. Because I think to me, it seems really realistic as an artist to just take the wins as they come, collect the paychecks, make your tunes, play your shows, and that's it, and not having to think about, okay, what if I own my own manager, my management company, I own my own team, I pay their salaries, got my own venues or my own, in Excision's case, his own festival to work on. That's two artists at two very different places at the end of their music career, just like a business owner, The guy who builds a business, takes the paycheck as it comes, doesn't innovate on the business, much, continues to rent out his capital to rent facilities, versus the guy who builds and the guy who is like, how can I bring that in-house? How can I own that? How can I, instead of renting my assets, I'm going to own them? Those two guys are different places at the end of their career. One guy's a millionaire, one other guy's a multi-centillionaire.
Right.
That's the difference.
Yeah. Okay. Well, cool. Why? Ask you this. This is another just personal question I have. How did we go from, dubstep being growls and wobbles to it predominantly being drum and bass?
Oh, we're going into like sound design?
Yeah, what happened, dude?
Oh, dude.
I want my Skrillex growls back.
Don't be an old man, bro. Like, I hate the way this new stuff sounds, man. No, I
actually love the Virtual Riot's take on it because he's kept a lot of his sound in there. He's just done a drum and bass like that. What was that last album that he dropped that you put me on?
Stealing Fire.
Yeah, there was. Yeah. That was actually
Simulation.
Fantastic. Pretty cool.
Well, he said it's an homage to Skrillex's A Quest for Fire from 2022.
Which is pure drum and bass.
Well, there's a lot of mid-tempo in there. You're talking about the meta of sound design, which is hilarious because we were talking about this before, like the types of synthesizers that have actually influenced a lot of the artists that we listen to today. Like when we were in high school, like between 20, like the I'll talk about the U.S. takeover of dubstep, like when dubstep really landed in the U.S. between like 2009 and 2011. There was a lot of artists that were coming out using Native Instruments synth called Massive. And Massive was like the go-to. It had the Skrillex sound. It had the Knife Party sound. It had like all the drum and bass sounds that you would associate with, all of the bro step sounds that you would associate with. Like that's where those came from.
Is Massive a plugin that will go into any will work in Ableton? It'll work in. That's cool. I did not know that they would cross.
It's a standard function or a standard file type called a VST or a virtual sound. Kill me. It's any virtual synthesizer will be in a VST format, and so you will be able to take that to any digital audio workstation. And so, Massive was like the de facto, the go-to, the industry standard for.
And that's where we got Bangarang album. We got.
I would think so, yeah. And to the point where there's actually an oscillator inside of Massive called Modern Talking, and very famously, Modern Talking was used on all the growl. I don't know if it was famously used, but it was famously used for a lot of dubstep growls at the time. To the point where it became so overused that Knife Party dropped an album called 100% No Modern Talking. It was a banger album, by the way.
Funny.
Because it was so overused, people were like, oh, I hate hearing that yow, yow, why, yow type bass. Yeah. Like, you could hear it in your head.
And I'm like, bring it back, dude.
Well, it's coming back.
Everybody go back to Massive.
It's coming back. Well, it's progressed, so the next big synth that really like colored our music, maybe like through the 2000 and I want to call it like 2012 to 2016 era, maybe beyond that, still maybe like 2018, 2020, was Serum, which was developed by a friend of Deadmau5. It was a terrible way to refer to him, Steve Duda, who's a genius music producer and music technologist, I would consider him, who created this program of another VST called Serum. And Serum was kind of like this like de facto like inheritor of all of these producers that were making bass music. They switched to Serum. I don't want to, speak for everyone, but Serum became like the new meta for bass music production. And very recently, the meta is changing a little bit again, away from Serum, still a great synth, super powerful, to a synth called Phase Plant. Shout out Kilohertz, because that shit is amazing. Probably one of the coolest synths ever made. It's like a virtual modular synth. It's got like tons of different engines inside of it, resynthesis, granular synthesis. You can have a seemingly unlimited number of oscillators, an unlimited number of modulators, a seemingly unlimited number of effects and lanes. Like you name it, this synth can do it. And it is by far and away the coolest thing I've ever worked with. And that is coloring the sound of a lot of modern, like up to 2024, a lot of modern electronic music is using still Massive, Serum, Phase Plant.
Are VSTs monetizable by their owners?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure Native Instruments is raking it in. They have a lot of instruments out there. They created a predecessor to Massive called Massive X, and it kind of didn't carry the same weight to it. with artists, but it still was, I'm sure it's still fairly good. But there are lots of VST companies out there. Waves Audio comes to mind, Kilohertz that makes phase plant. There's a lot of those guys out there because music technology is a huge market, and like sample companies like Splice is a huge sample database that also includes presets. You can also rent to own because some of these softwares are not cheap. So you can rent to own some of these softwares. Yeah, so it's kind of like an always evolving meta of like what is producing like the coolest sound and sound design and modern audiences' ears. So funny that you mentioned like this is a very common topic in modern production. Music production is like, oh, go back to the old Skrillex, go back to the, and music is such a temporal medium because you could never go back to, you could never be the Xavier you were in 2016, hearing whatever it was for the first time.
Right.
And that artist will never be that artist that they were sitting between those blown out speakers, making something that no one's ever heard before. You know, like, so it's really interesting because like this is a common topic, like go back to the old you know, but we'll never be the same person listening. So even if that artist decided like, you know what, I am going to go back, I'm going to revisit that album. Maybe I'll even make like some remixes or whatever. It still won't ever hit you the same way because it's a temporal medium. It's, you know, things are different now than they were back then.
It was awesome because the first time we were hearing it was a brand new experience.
And to chase that idea is fairly dangerous for an artist because I think being an artist these days is being someone that you trust and an audience that can trust that the music that this person is going to put out is both an extension of themselves and a, you know, the next step, the progression of themselves. And you're battling kind of this competition. Saying, we were talking, I was playing some of my music next to some of the other music you like, and some of the tracks are not competitive in the way that they sound because the sounds sound a little outdated or the mix down's a little bit different and it's not tuned for modern sound systems or whatever. And so there's lots of mixing and mastering being done to be competitive in today's soundscape to make your song stand out. You might hear that the term thrown around, loudness war. The loudness war. How loud can you make a track, right? And so all of these little things have a pressure on an artist who's especially an artist producer for sound selection to determine, you know, what sounds they're going to use and the way that they're going to arrange them or compose them. Has a lot to do with their influences and other artists in the scene. So it's funny that you mentioned that because we are coming back around, at least from my anecdotal experience, we're coming back around on some of that early US bass sound. A lot of FM synthesis, a lot of bass growls, but we're not seeing it in that tempo space anymore. 140 is kind of a little slow for today's like live events. So you're seeing things like UKG, which is UK garage or garage as they want to call it. So you're actually hearing a little bit slowed down, but a double timed hat kick and snare pattern for UKG, and that's sitting typically between like 128 and 136 BPM. And then you have mid-tempo tracks, a lot like Virtual Riot or Skrillex in a mid-tempo environment, somewhere between 150 BPM and maybe 155, where you get that really bouncy, swingy pace that sounds good with halftime drums like dubstep drums, but also sounds good with like four on the floor style like house and electronica drums. So that those two BPMs seem to be a little bit more popular, and those were super popular. Like one straight 140 kick and snare on the 2 and 4. That is a little bit on its way out. So you're seeing kind of the old sound design come back, but in a much, I tend to think, a much cleaner sounding UK garage type genre, or in a much more flexible mid-tempo style.
You got me
range.
optimistic for the future.
Oh, I mean,
I'm pumped.
Dude, dubstep is like, I don't think a lot of people realize like dubstep is actually like a outcome of a sound design war. You used to see this in metal bands back in the day, like who can be harder, who can have the faster, deeper, lower bass, faster, more distorted guitar. And so you saw that in metal bands a lot. It was like, who could be fucking harder, right? And so with dubstep, it's like the same thing, and bass music particularly, not just dubstep. you have this like sound design war going on with dudes who are and gals who can be like, oh, I can go harder than that. I can go harder than that. I can make my bass louder. I can make my bass more distorted. I can make my wubs. I can bring the entire house down. Like, how loud can we get it? How insane can we go? And I think that's one of the coolest things and that people don't realize about modern dubstep or modern electronic music is like how technical things have gotten and how it's become a war with sound design and the physical limits that we can push, like literal speaker hardware.
What does that war mean for as a barrier of entry to new artists coming into the space? When you've got these people that have been doing it forever and they're mastering it, right?
It's crazy to think about learning Ableton or FL or Reason or Pro Tools. Crazy to think about learning that for the first time today and hearing some of the stuff. Like, imagine putting Ableton in front of someone for the first time and then playing them Virtual Riot and be like, okay, your turn.
Yeah.
You know?
Impossible.
Well, it's becoming easier.
Really?
It's actually getting easier. So like the especially with AI, which, I mean, we could have a whole conversation. We could have a whole podcast on AI and music and my thoughts on that.
Down.
But no, the barrier to entry is actually lower than it ever has been. The way the amount of time between starting and finishing a song has never been easier. You know, there are tools out there that, I mean,
that makes me even more optimistic.
Well, here's the thing, dude. Back in the day, drum samples were like the Coca-Cola secret formula. Like, if you were a DJ producer and you had a kick drum that fucking hit, you wouldn't let your closest bro see that waveform. You wouldn't let your closest friend drag and drop that file. That is good as gold. Now, there's a million different kick drum samples, a million different snare samples. All those famous drum samples are all out there. So literally anyone who wants to make music has all the ingredients that they want to at their fingertips. It has literally never been easier. YouTube tutorials to make literally the most advanced sound design. You know, Virtual Riot and AU5, another guy that does this really well, all of their stuff's on YouTube. You can watch them step by step make a patch on Serum or Massive or Phase Plant. You can even download some of those patches, right, and have those sounds for yourself and modify them to make them, you know, unique to yourself. So no, I actually think that the barrier to entry for music production has literally never been lower, and especially considering AI. Like, there's a kid out there, like an iPad kid, who's like putting together samples and AI created snippets that's going to make like the next Billboard, you know, top 10 hit with like a collection of samples and that they exclusively found on the internet.
That's awesome.
Yeah, without a doubt in my mind.
That's awesome. I'm pumped. I'm here for it. I'm super optimistic about the future of dubstep based on those things.
Dude.
I thought the barrier of entry would have been extremely high at this point because there's so much work that's gone into perfecting everything through this war that you're talking about. But if all of the information's open source and available, then
yeah, I mean, everyone can go online and pirate a copy of their favorite DAW. I'm not advocating for this, but if you have if you were a poor kid like I was with no money and no access to hundreds of dollars worth of equipment, you go online and you see what you can get away with. And you start with a pirated copy of Ableton or FL, and you start with a stolen sample pack kit, and you start throwing loops together, and you start throwing bass lines together, and eventually, I think, and there's been many examples of this, of like famous producers that use like a pirated copy of their production software for a really embarrassingly long time until they became legit enough to pay the $500 to $1,000 to buy it.
That's awesome.
And I think it's kind of like a no hard feelings type thing. And if FL Studio, if ImageLine ever reached out to me and was like, hey, can you pay us for all those years? I'd be like, I'd be more than happy to.
Yeah.
FL Studio, ImageLine, hit me up. I will pay for all those years that I used FL Studio without your permission. I apologize.
Oh my God, that's awesome.
And that's how you get started.
Hey, my first copy of Ableton was definitely stolen. I got it off a USB thumb drive from some guy on the bus in like 8th grade. I'm not even kidding, dude. I'd have to always I always have to disable my internet on my computer, then
so
open the software.
Validate the
exactly
serial code.
Yeah. And I was doing, it's harmless. I was just playing the keyboard, dude. I wasn't trying to sell anything or make money.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think, I don't know. I'd have to look up and see if it's like common for DAW manufacturers to like sue artists for using their shit without a license.
I mean, you can't sue somebody that doesn't have money.
I don't know if you'd be. I don't know if that's correct.
But they're gonna put it.
See for anything.
They're gonna put on a lien on my future assets from when I'm in high school.
Yeah, no, that.
Yeah.
I mean, if ImageLine ever came down to my office, I'd probably have some explaining to do. They're like, hey, how many years did you use FL Studio without paying for it? I'd be like, probably a decade. Between when I was 13 and when I was like 23, like, yeah, definitely owe you guys a little bit for that. But once you buy FL Studio, you have it in perpetuity and you have the upgrades. So once I actually bought the software, I think hopefully no harm, no foul. Again, ImageLine, please don't hurt me. I love you guys.
All right, man. Well, this has been awesome, dude. I really appreciate it.
This has been awesome. Yeah, we gotta do this again.
I have like a next series of questions, so we should definitely do this again. But
I'm 100% down, dude. I can come
man.
here and yap all day for you.
That's awesome. All right, dude. And let's figure out how to get Virtual Riot in Indy.
No, I'm trying to think. Like maybe I have his page. I'm on his Patreon, so like maybe I can hit him up on a Patreon message and be like, "Yo, let me talk to your agent, and I'll get you in touch with his agent. And if we can have some air of professionalism, I'm sure we could have a conversation with his agent on what it would literally take to get him to come to a venue and what the logistics of that would look like.
And then we just find the place that matches that list of contingencies.
Exactly. Yeah. It hits the criteria. Then maybe if you're looking at trouble, then maybe you could reach out to someone like MOKB or Do 317 or Indie Mojo, or in like an extreme circumstance, you could reach out to the ownership of the old National Center and Live Nation about what the venue rental situation is looking like. And from there, you just got to make sure that the funds line up. And if you obviously don't do it outside. you imagine taking a $500,000 haircut because it rained.
Yeah, that's insane. That's insane that's even a thing.
Outdoor venues, it's crazy to think about the risk involved. That it rains.
Dude, to be honest,
one
if
crack
that were
of thunder.
my outdoor venue, this is a rain or shine event.
Oh, if there's thunder,
that's true. Yeah, thunder.
That's
and lightning.
the thing. You get this thing like the Indianapolis State Fair stage collapse because they didn't send people away in time and people died because of it. It's just like it's just a very local extreme example of when you don't get it right, like what the liability could literally be. You could be at the top of your game. I don't remember what band was playing, but like. That's also fucked up for them too.
Yeah.
To like be booked at a show where people died. I think a lot about like the Las Vegas shooting a lot, and it's like, how do you even account for this? How do you plan for this? It's crazy to think of the type of risk that some promotion companies take on, and even the unthinkable. Something like the Mandalay Bay situation. So, yeah, and it's crazy to think about. The music industry could, hanging on by a thread in some cases, establishments that we think are like bulletproof, many years older than us, how fickle that stuff can be. It's crazy.
All right, man. Well, this has been awesome, dude.
Let's wrap this up.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. That was fun.